I'd like to call the City of Oconomowoc Utility Committee meeting to order. Has this meeting been properly noticed?
Yes, it has.
Please call roll.
Okay. Mulder? Zaffel?
Present.
And Kavieski.
Here. Looking for a motion to approve the minutes from May 26, 2020.
So moved.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Moving on to committee business, we'll start with the consider act on approving large water meter evaluation, testing, and collaboration services.
Scott's going to take that.
Yeah, thank you. Before you, we have a summary of bids that we opened, quotes that we opened for large meter testing. We got 3 quotes. The lowest being from Midwest Testing for $13,655. We're looking for a consider act on approving this contract to Midwest Testing with a 10% contingency.
Thank you. We'll open for discussion unless you have anything else to add to that. Discussion? I see we have, we had 3 quotes out, 2 quotes returned. Low bid for $13,655, as you mentioned. The other for $20,944, and then one not able to meet the time frame by Midwest Meter.
Correct.
How many actually did we solicit? Just the 3, or were there multiple out there and only 3 indicated possibility of replying, or?
Those were the 3 that, well, we talked to probably 2 or 3 more, but they did not want the information. These were the 3 that said they would be able to provide a quote, even though one of them didn't.
Was it properly noticed on the Daily Reporter and on the city's website?
This was just a request.
This was just a
Visual
request.
request. Okay.
We solicited the information.
Was there a reason it wasn't noticed in those publications? Just
Typically, on these smaller projects that we know there's a limited amount of people that have a service like this, we will just go out and make phone calls to solicit the quotes instead of spending the money on advertising and stuff.
got it. This is within budget?
What was the question? I didn't hear what he
Budget?
Budget? No, this is not in the budget. This is a process we typically do in-house through the winter months, but for reasons we were unable to get that done this past winter, and so we need to get it done, and we have to have it contracted out. But normally this is an in-house, and after this, it will be back in-house.
Any other questions? Discussion?
Does payment then come out of the funds you have, or is
It'll come out of cash reserves? Yeah, correct.
Okay, looking for a motion to recommend and approve the $15,020 not to exceed lump sum with a base bid of $13,655 as presented and requested.
so moved?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Next up on the agenda is a presentation of the Oconomowoc Watershed Protection Program Annual Program Update. This is a great opportunity to get this information into the committee. We have talked about the watershed program for a while. Outside of this particular presentation, because of this opportunity, I did request that this committee meeting be live streamed in order for it to be accessible to the general public. There are some people who know a lot about the program and absolutely love it, and some who don't know as much as they can and should, and hopefully this gives an opportunity to give them access to that. So thank you very much for being here to present. I'll turn it over to you.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone, and thanks for the opportunity to be here. We're excited about the program as we have been for the last 5 years, and it's continues to be very effective. And I wanted to not only give you an update today, but also give you a little background, knowing that we have the new councilman on the committee. So for those of you who have heard this before, we're going to have to bear with it for a little bit. But I think it's very important to know the background and why we're at this point in this program for the city. So to start, I'd like to just introduce myself. I have been with the program since its infancy, when I was a full-time employee with the city of Oconomowoc back in 2013, I guess is when we first started looking at this. And been retired for a couple of years, but I stepped back in to help manage the program since I retired. With me today is Daryl Smith, who is our ag coordinator for the program, who was brought on in actually 2015. And I'm going to let Daryl talk about his position just a little bit. So.
Yeah, I'll jump in a little bit, but my name is Daryl Smith. I'm the Ag Project Coordinator for the Watershed Program, and my focus is actually in helping to connect farmers to both the concepts and ideas that we're wanting to promote, but also to resources, whether that's coming from the city or from state or federal dollars from the USDA. It's really a success born of those different contributing partners. And so I'm there to be a resource person kind of on the ground and literally on the ground in certain cases. And I'll share a little more about the projects that I've been involved in very briefly. And I basically tag team with Tom, and we'll be taking on some expanded roles, hopefully, and reporting, things like that, administrative going forward.
Okay, so let's see if this works. All right, so why is the city involved with the watershed program? I think that's probably the base question that maybe needs to be answered by us for some of the new councilmen, and certainly not the mayor because he's been involved with the program. But so why is the city involved with the watershed program? Well, back in the late 1990s, the state of Wisconsin was being pressured by the EPA to start various watershed rehabilitation projects. And the state of Wisconsin was delegated the responsibility for environmental stewardship decades ago by the EPA. So there's several states, or a handful of states throughout the United States, that are delegated this authority. Otherwise, they are basically regulated by EPA directly. So the state of Wisconsin regulates its own environmental affairs through the DNR. So EPA was looking at the state to get going on their watershed basin rehab programs, and they said, you guys need to look at which basin you're going to start with. They started with the Rock River Basin and the TMDL study, which represents total maximum daily load, TMDL. TMDL study was begun around the year 2000. It took 12 years to complete. And in and about 2012 is when the city was given the limits that would be imposed on it for phosphorus. So the city has been treating for phosphorus at its treatment facility for decades. And the numbers were going to be made much more stringent as a result of the Rock River TMDL study. So this slide shows the Rock River Basin, and all the red tributaries represent impaired reaches in that basin. So the watershed is 49 miles in length, 131 square miles in area, 83,000 acres. And includes 17 lakes, and the star represents the city of Oconomowoc. Zooming in a little bit further, you can see there's 3 impaired streams in the watershed: Flynn Creek, Mason Creek, and Battle Creek. And there's 5 impaired lakes, all represented by the triangles: Freeze Lake, North Lake, Okauchee Lake, Oconomowoc Lake, and Lac La Belle. So what does an impaired stream look like? This is the Mason Creek flowing into North Lake in 2015 after a pretty major storm. You can see it's pretty chocolate brown. This is the Connie Creek, or Connie River, I'm sorry, up in the north end of the watershed, in other words, the headwaters, March of this year, and you can see the impaired condition of that stream. On this particular day, this stream actually had an odor. There was that much pollutant load flowing into the main river at that time. So an impaired stream basically is a water body that does not meet the intended purposes of that water body, whether it's a lake or a stream. And that can be impaired for total phosphorus, total suspended solids, bacteria, and other chemicals such as mercury and PCBs. The treatment plant in Oconomowoc is the only treatment facility in the watershed. So this is important because when you want to do work in a watershed versus at the facility itself, the treatment facility is the one responsible to do that. So I want to emphasize that this plant is a technological wonder, and if you haven't toured it, you really should, because basically every facet of engineering is present at this plant, and it does a terrific job with the staff and the management that it has. So I would highly encourage you to tour it if you haven't. Like I say, it has been removing phosphorus to all the required levels to date, and through this watershed program, it will be continuing that removal and actually reducing the effluent volume or effluent concentration of phosphorus to the river as part of the adaptive management program, which is the DNR program that basically oversees the reduction of phosphorus as a result of the TMDL study. So in grand scheme of things, the requirement under the watershed program is to meet a certain level of phosphorus at the confluence where the Oconomowoc River hits the Rock River in the town of Ixonia. So I have circled here the actual confluence where the river enters the Rock River, and that is the point that will be the basis for compliance in year 15 of the adaptive management program. So in 2015, the status of the concentration of phosphorus was 0.09 milligrams per liter, and our target is 0.075. Relatively close numbers. So in 2013 through 2014, the city evaluated its cost, looking forward to either doing brick and mortar projects at the treatment plant alone, or working in the entire watershed to reduce the amount of phosphorus flowing down the river system. And at that time, it was determined that the total long-term cost would be $15 million in operation and capital expenses if we did the work in-house at the treatment plant, or if we did the work in the watershed, it would be $5 million. So there was a financial incentive to work in the watershed. I will say at this point, I don't have a slide for this, but there's also a bigger incentive in my mind for the city to do watershed work, and that's to protect the livelihood of the city, and that we're very much focused on our water quality. Most of our events in the city are having to do with things around the lakes, and doing brick and mortar projects at the treatment plant would do nothing to protect that water. Doing things in the watershed does everything to protect that water.
So, question, so what would we have done at the plant if we're already, the water already coming out? Would we have been diverting water to the plant to handle more water? What would have?
No, the river water does not go into the plant, would not go into the plant. The storm water goes into the river directly as well. What would have been happening at the plant was there would have been more treatment devices or systems installed to get that phosphorus level down to a level of 0.17.
Blending.
Right. Yes, and that's where that cost comes from. That 15 million would have been for additional machinery and processes at the plant and chemical. All right, so moving on then, it was decided to move forward with a watershed approach, and the city applied for an adaptive management program through DNR and was approved September 2015. We were actually the first adaptive management program approved in the state of Wisconsin. We were also approved for the first regional conservation partnership program in January of 2015, and that's an NRCS Department of Ag program. That was a brand-new program out of the box at that time to address watershed issues. So at that time, the watershed program was basically born. So our objective then, as a result of that, is meeting water quality criteria at the confluence, like I said, of 0.075 milligrams per liter. And to do that, our reduction measures would include reducing erosion and nutrient loss coming off of the land in the watershed, improving soil health to make that happen, improving stormwater management, and Mark Fry's here tonight, and he can attest to you what's going on Worthington Street, large project there to address a good part of the stormwater system in the city. Reducing inputs to urban and rural areas, improving waterfront property management. It's also a key component to our program. Okay, so to give you an idea now of what goes on in this program, we're going to give you a brief sampling of some projects that have occurred in the last year or so. There are things going on up and down the watershed from the headwaters up near Slinger all the way down into the town of Concord, but we're just going to highlight a few things going on here, and we're here to ask or to answer any questions that you would have regarding other projects. And then I've also included this map, which is our pin map showing all of our projects throughout the last 5 years, and you can see there's a lot of activity that's gone on. We have multiple projects in all of our townships, and been involved with the NRCS and many landowners throughout the community and the watershed. So starting at the county line, basically between Waukesha County and Concord, is a couple of projects, and I'm going to invite Daryl up to the mic so that he can speak to these in a little bit more detail.
So one of the overall guiding principles that we have is to try to prevent soil from moving and keep it on the land where it's best used and not in the river. Soil inherently contains phosphorus and other nutrients that can then cause issues in water quality, algae blooms and things like that. So I work with landowners and farmers. Some of them would be the renting farmer that I would meet first. In other cases, the landowner themselves who might rent out to a farmer, and talk about ways to have more perennial cover on the landscape, on the agricultural areas in particular. So rather than annually tilling the soil and planting corn or soy and so forth, although that's often what's needing to happen from the farmer's livelihood, we may be taking and adding buffers into particular areas, or having more grass cover that would be there year-round, and that would help to prevent the erosion in particularly sensitive areas. So this is a slide of a couple farm fields low in the watershed, close to the Oconomowoc River. In one case, we were actually converting the borders of that field to pollinator habitat and grass-based systems. So you can think of native wildflowers and grasses, but large sections of that upper field in the slide still remain in corn and soy production, but it's the borders that are being converted to a pollinator system. And lower down there, closer to the river, it's being kept in hay, and we're incentivizing continuing it in hay production or being kept in some type of grass system. So by contracting with the landowner, we're basically having them commit that over the next 10 years, it stays in that kind of system, rather than converting back to a corn soy production that it has been in the last 5 years as well. So that's just sort of a brief example. Let's see here. Another one a little bit closer to town, but still in the southwest. There's a tributary around that crosses Allen Road, and There are a variety of things that we've discovered through regular testing that's done by the city, but also by a volunteer group that we call the Mud Chasers. And they go out on an event basis and look at water sampling, first using the Secchi tube, which was on a previous slide, that looks at the clarity of water. And then if there's a reason for concern, submitting a sample to the lab, and Kevin's staff will do an actual analysis of the phosphorus content and just determine if there's a cause for concern. And we're not really looking to get anyone in trouble per se, but we're looking to direct our funding towards areas that we are seeing to be regular areas of concern. And so then we've identified it, we get a little closer in, contact the landowner. In this case, a renting farmer has been really helpful in connecting us to landowners in the area and saying, hey, I'm wanting to do good work in our farming in this region, and there's some wet areas, kind of always wet or marginal in most years. Maybe they could be converted to other types of cover. And in some cases, we can actually convert it to cover that can also be harvested, but at least it's a perennial cropping system. So we're also looking at the stream bank itself. This is an area that used to be in grazed land, back in the 40s and 50s. Now in annual cropland, it's actually contributed to the above ground flow, and a stream has resulted and formed over time. And that stream has kind of meandered through and created some scouring, and we're investigating what kinds of work can be done on it, what the NRCS, the National Resource Conservation Service, can contribute to it, and we'll eventually be putting together a proposal and coming to the city with what can be done there. So that's just an example of in the low areas of the watershed. Yeah.
So we compensate the farmers then for this. Is that an annual compensation, or do we?
Good question. So the goal is to provide a package to the farmer that makes the farmer whole, and that can be either 70% coming from the USDA NRCS funds with an additional 30% to make them whole at 100% on installation costs. If the city funds directly without going through the NRCS, then it's about a 90% cost coverage. But then for areas taken out of production, we provide an annual rent that would not be there through any other funding source. And so that's where the city really is able to deliver a proposal to a farmer, which we target. Our goal is not to take large areas out of production, but to say, hey, for an area that you are losing from production, we're renting at a certain amount, and that amount is determined by where it is in the watershed, how close it is to the surface water, the slope and topography of the area, and we have a matrix just so that it's a fair system for how we score things. Okay, so I'm going to actually turn it back to Tom at this point.
Okay, so we're going to move up into the watershed just a little ways here to north of Lac La Belle. And we are entering into a DNR TRIM grant, which stands for Targeted Runoff Management System through the DNR. And this application has been submitted for the Golf Course Creek that runs through the Lac La Belle Golf Course. And I'll just use the pointer here. It starts up in a marshy area up here and flows down underneath the bypass and then down through the golf course. So this is a four-party project. Village of Lac La Belle, City of Oconomowoc, the Lac La Belle Management District, and Prestwick are the parties involved with this grant application. Right now, we're waiting for DNR's response, but it looks like a very favorable review is on its way. And this will be about a $230,000 grant with a matching 30% from the partners.
Real quick on that one. What determines success for that particular project as you've identified?
Okay, so if you look at this slide, I think this is a good one to answer that. This is the bypass here, so the flow is coming this way, past this pond. And you can see the meandering then that occurs throughout the golf course. And what happens here is you have, during high flow periods, you have tremendous stream bank washing going on. And you can see the erosion here. The banks are literally sloughing off down into the stream and overtopping some of the oxbows here. This example shows that, where your high flow periods will completely overwash this particular finger of land. Here's another example of sloughing off of the stream banks, and another example here. So the actual target here with this project is to keep these banks intact and control the water flashiness. We call it flashiness if the river has extreme flows versus its average flows, and to keep this erosion from happening. So the ultimate goal is to stabilize these banks with various engineering practices and products that are available, and avoid this type of erosion from happening in the future.
That erosion then allows for more chemical and runoff that would increase the phosphorus and other things that are detrimental to the water flow and would have required treatment at the plant, but taking care of it at the source eliminates that requirement.
Yes, it does. The sediment that's washed from these banks, for example, contains phosphorus. So not only do we have a sediment issue in Lac La Belle, but we also have the phosphorus that comes off with that sediment and creates the algae blooms and associated problems with eutrophication in lakes.
Golf course is regulated as far as how much or what kind of chemicals they can use on the course to prevent any type of leakage.
They are, however, as part of this project that we have going on with them, we are working with them to make sure those practices are done appropriately. Yes. Okay, moving further up into the watershed, all the way up to the headwaters up here, which is the area of the Connie River. We have another ag project, which I'm going to turn over back to Daryl.
Just to be conscious of time, I'll just be real brief here. This is a farm that actually is working with us as well as with one of our partners, Tall Pines Conservancy, who's helped to establish an easement on the farm. And as part of that easement, there are various practices being installed, like buffers and also some tile outlets that have been fixed. And then we directly work with the farmer on an 8-acre parcel. The photo that you see next will kind of explain a little more why. So this is just an area that has runoff during the early spring. Late winter, for example, is usually a time for peak runoff. So you can see some gullying and scouring that then would head into the Connie through a ditch. And then the right photo is actually very recent. Tom just took a photo of it. So this is part of the perennial cover that we put in, and it can be harvested and fed to the animals on the farm. So that's a benefit to the farmer, but also it would be there year after year. It's a 10-year program that we put in, so they're committing to leaving it in this rather than the corn soybean rotation that was there before. And so all that protects the soil. This farmer also has participated in our aerial seeding program, and you might have heard of that. We're doing an aerial cover crop program by helicopter. And so the difference between that and what this is this is perennially covered, so every year it's permanent, so to speak. The helicopter program is to fly on seeds in the mid-fall to help establish cover that fills in the early spring the next year and provides cover during periods before the annual crops come in and really leaf out. So it's sort of a middle ground. It's not there forever, but it's there seasonally to help provide some boost during vulnerable periods. Soon after soybeans and corn are planted, it's still at least another month and a half until the canopies close, and there's still a lot of erosion potential in May and June. So that's just an example of, and this particular site has participated with our program now in 3 different ways.
So to sum up the agricultural side of what we do, you may have heard the phrase of healthy soils are always green. What that means is that crops may be taken off at different times of the year, but then cover crops are immediately planted, or they're planted earlier than the normal crop comes off via our helicopter, and the greening process is already in place by the time the normal crop is taken off. So cover crops are a tremendous soil health building tool that we utilize a lot in our program, and we're trying to educate more and more people about that concept. Okay, so moving back down on the watershed to the North Lake area, we have a project going on in May and June. We've got about a week left of this particular project, and we're monitoring 3 tributaries to North Lake. The Mason Creek, shown on the left, Little Oconomowoc here, and then the main Oconomowoc River are the 3 tributaries that we're monitoring. You can see them on this map here. Mason Creek being in red. This happens to be the worst tributary in the watershed in terms of water quality. Little Oconomowoc comes down from the north, and then here's the main Oconomowoc coming in from the east. So the Mason Creek is on what we call the 303D list, which is basically the list nationwide that has all the impaired streams on it. And Little Oconomowoc is actually fairly good quality, and then the Oconomowoc River is not on the impaired list. However, we know it has some elevated phosphorus and TSS at times. So the whole point of this study is to not only do the sampling for determining the concentrations of phosphorus and TSS, but also to look at flow measurement from these 3 tributaries so that we can actually calculate the mass loading into the lake. So this is important because what constitutes a load to a lake or to any body of water is the mass loading. We can look at concentration all day long, but we need to know what the mass loading is into these water bodies to really determine where we should focus our efforts. So through this study, we will gain the mass loading coming from these 3 tributaries, which has not been done before. Okay, so other work we do, we're working with Freeze Lake periodically here to sample the inlet, which is right here. This is the Oconomowoc River coming into the lake, and the outlet down here goes into Little Freeze Lake, and then the deep hole area here. So we're developing some trends here by sampling more often. We'll be out there in July sampling these 3 locations again. But just an example of what we're looking at phosphorus, suspended solids, ammonia, and then we do visual Secchi disc readings as well. Overall, the long-term projects that Daryl was talking about are generally 10-year commitments by landowners. And this chart basically just shows you all the different types of best management practices that we're involved with. So we've got everything from grass swales to reforestation, buffer strips, pollinator cover, conservation cover, even some animal control projects where we've assisted the farmer with keeping livestock away from the edge of the river. So there's a wide range of different projects that we can get involved with. And right now we have over 40 different long-term projects. We've got well over 450 acres in long-term projects as well. Education of the farming community. This is a soil health field day that we held in August. We actually dug 2 pits like this in the fields at this farm to have demonstrations of the layering of soils for the farmers to look at. This was done in conjunction with UWX Extension Green Bay.
That was August of 2019?
Yes. Yes, you're right. We're not looking into the crystal ball there. You're right.
Right.
My mistake. Okay, paddle event. We have an annual fun event, middle of the year, where we just generally go out and have fun on the water. We talk about a few of the shoreline issues that are present. We like to get kids involved, so this happened to be a Boy Scout group from the Heartland area that did a bit of a scavenger hunt along Fowler Lake that day, and they talked about what they found, and then we did a little training event for some kids later on, talking about how they can actually do monitoring with their parents and submit their data to a national database. We also participated in a water quality program in the Ixonia area last year where we taught the kids a little bit about wastewater treatment, talked about the biology involved, and then actually showed them some of the actual biology that was involved in our treatment plant processes. So our next annual paddle event, which you have a flyer before you, is on July 18th, and it'll occur at the Highway Q boat launch in Monchess, and you're all certainly invited to join us. We'll be dedicating our new kiosk at that location and the revamped boat launch that was installed there about a year ago through the replacement of the bridge. Again, Mark Fry and I were cheerleaders of that project and put a little pressure on, if you will, to the county to make some enhancements to the boat launch. We started our newsletter last year in October, so I've given you the second issue of that, and you're welcome to sign on to the email blast that goes out for that. This is a 2 to 3 year, or a 2 to 3 event newsletter that comes out all about the watershed and what's going on. It's a partnership-based program. We have over 35 different partners. Many of them are very active. Tall Pines Conservancy is the most active partner in the program. We also spun out another group, Lake Country Clean Waters, from our group, and their function is to work with the lake management districts and provide information and collective efforts to get things done. We also have a farmers group that was spun out of our OWPP, and that's called Farmers for Lake Country. And basically, that's a core group of farmers that we use to bounce ideas off and enroll them into different programs and get their partnership into helping with on-the-ground logistics during our fall seeding program. So then some other partners that you might not think would be very likely, but Pheasants Forever has actually funded some of our projects. Of course, they're interested in habitat restoration, and then, of course, Trout Unlimited. But like I say, we have probably over 35 different partners, and those are listed on the general brochure that I've given you tonight. So feel free to follow our progress. We have a number of different websites that you can look at, but the Oconomowoc-watershed.com is the main one for the OWPP. So with that, I will take any questions.
Thank you for the presentation. Truly appreciate it, Tom and Daryl, all the effort you guys put into it. Just a question on slide 16, from the analysis done in 2013, for the route that you're doing it now, you said costs $5 million. If they are gonna do it at the waste treatment plant, it'd be $15 million. Just out of curiosity, have you received an updated number of what it would cost if it was done today? And then out of that $5 million, how much has been spent so far?
Okay, great question. The $5 million was an estimate of doing work in the watershed and some of the work that would be done at the treatment plant. So we have capital projects that and chemical-based costs, I guess, at the treatment plant that are actually as part of that $5 million. So that's not just watershed dollars. I think we're really right on track. We've spent about $1.5 million so far. And if you look at this as a 15-year project, we're pretty much on track for that $5 million. Kevin is continuing to reduce the level at the treatment plant and has investigated some different chemicals that came out since we started this program. And that was part of the premise for going into adaptive management, is that we knew that there would be technological advances and that this would give us time to take advantage of some of those advances. So I think through the work that he's doing with investigating some of these new advances should help us in the long run to reduce our costs long term. So I hope that answers your question.
Thank you.
Okay.
Kevin, what's the level, phosphorus level of the water coming out of the plant right now? 7.5. And that's what we need the whole ecosystem to get down to? where it hits the rock to 0.75? 0.075, okay.
Permit, if it comes out in October like it's supposed to, we will be at. Phosphorus, if we go to 0.6.
Yeah, the reduction at the plant would be about that amount. We're looking at an overall reduction of about 5,000 pounds per day in phosphorus reduction.
What, sorry, I'm getting technical on you here. So I think it was 3 million gallons a day that's coming out of the plant. What's the total flow of the river?
Total flow of the river at the confluence is about 90 million gallons.
So it's a small.
You had mentioned Trout Forever as one of the partners,
Trout Unlimited?
Trout Unlimited.
Yes.
Have they been involved in any programs at Rosenau Creek? And there was a cleanup of Rosenau Creek on a north tributary. Were you involved in that?
They haven't been involved with that, but they've been involved with Mason Creek, which is another trout stream in the watershed. So we have 3 trout streams actually in the watershed, which is actually quite remarkable. The Connie River up in the headwaters of the watershed is also considered to have areas of it that are trout stream quality. So Trout Unlimited, I think, will be becoming more involved with more of our projects as we go down the road.
Still contributing factor to Mason Creek being so farm runoff there, or?
It is an area that is heavily farmed, and part of the contributing factor there is the area of the headwaters of that creek was a wetland if you go back 100, 150 years. And it had been channelized to create farmland, more farmland, which is typically what a lot of areas were, what was being done in the mid-1800s, early 1900s. So that area is one of the worst streams as a result of that channelization. So one of the options that's being looked at through a sewer pack study is to actually put ditch checks in and return some of that area back to wetland. Correct, correct.
Has the state stepped up, not only through the DNR, but through other state opportunities for funding to ensure the success of this program?
They have. They've been involved with a few stream bank restoration projects, and they're very involved with perimeter lake property management projects. So there's quite a few opportunities out there for even individual homeowners to seek assistance with some of those programs. And then there's the in-kind, if you will, not actually dollar programs, but there's programs that are offered for helping homeowners and stream bank landowners to do a better job on their stream bank management.
You get involved in helping to bring light to that as part of the process and program?
We do, and that's mainly through that Lake Country Clean Waters group. That has been a real essential group for our program, and just in the last 6 months, we've really gotten that program off the ground, and we have a great annual conference that was just held June 5th, virtually this year. Has some excellent speakers, so I think that lake group is going to be a real asset to our program in the second 5-year program here that we've got facing us.
What's our annual rent that we're paying out right
In total or on a acre by acre basis?
now? Total?
In total? we are paying out roughly $55,000 a year for long-term projects.
Any other questions? I'd like to thank you for providing the information, and I'd like to thank staff for getting us into this situation so we could live stream it, so others could view it as it's being presented here live and later on. This program continues to gain traction, and I'm excited to see that. A lot of our city programs are essential, but don't have as big of an impact on as many aspects of life here in the city and the surrounding area. And this one really does it. I'm really glad that we took this approach compared to the mechanical in-plant only solution. It provides for better quality of life for all of us. I appreciate your dedication, and I appreciate staff's dedication to making this successful. And hopefully we can continue to gain traction with partners, and the long-term success be replicated in other areas in the state and possibly the nation. So thank you.
You're welcome. And I'd like to thank Daryl also. Daryl's a key component of this program, and been good to have him aboard, so. If you'd like me to leave these charts at all with you tonight, I'd be glad to leave this here in case you want to look at it later. Okay. Okay.
Moving on to committee reports. I'd like to take a look at utility billing report, June 2020.
Yeah, the utility billing report, I don't have too much to add other than the written report which was presented. The main thing that I would just like to highlight is recently the Public Service Commission did vote to reestablish a process for re-implementing late fees and disconnections for customers. That's going to start in mid-July, so we're still working with them on the details of how that implementation will be rolled out. But what we do plan on doing is sending out a courtesy reminder letter to our past due customers to either try to get back into making payments or contacting us to make appropriate payment arrangements so they can prepare ahead of time.
Any comments or questions? Thank you very much. Moving on to electric report, June 2020.
Few things that I'd like to highlight is the voltage conversion on Thompson Street to the new police station has been completed. So we went from a 2,400 volt system to a 25,000 volt system to give the new police station the power voltage it needs, and then gets us closer to the Wisconsin substation conversion at a point in the near future to de-energize that old facility. Also the cable replacement. There was some old cable in the 2nd Street area, Industrial Park, that we were getting a lot of faults on. That has been completed and replaced for better reliability in that area. As far as major projects, the Evan, we've started installing the 3-phase power to the Evan. And the Forest Street circuit number 84, we are going from overhead to underground in that whole reconstruction phase of Forest Street. So that was a good opportunity there. We have started cable injection replacement. I've talked a little bit about all of you guys about cable replacement. Old injected cable that faults west over Frederick Court and Bolson Drive, all have areas of cable that had high fault rates. So another system improvement job. So other than that, going good.
Nice. Any questions, comments? I do have one.
Sure.
The substation and the decommission of that substation
Wisconsin Avenue substation,
on Wisconsin
yes.
Avenue. Are we getting closer to a point where, from a policy standpoint, we could take a look at what the long-term, short-term, long-term reallocation of that substation as it's being, as decommission is finished?
Well, there's a few things to consider as a whole of that facility. So we can decommission the electric side of it, get the old, there's a very large power transformer in a room in there. That will be removed. It has to go through the roof with a crane. We got to put a new roof on it. There's a whole big project going on with that we're intending on completing this year yet. The well that is inside that facility will get abandoned at some point, but note that the reservoir that is right next to the building, that concrete pad you see, that is an underground reservoir. That has to stay there. That is used for the mixing and settling of the water, for the proper chemical absorption that we insert into the water, for the quality of the water for the drinking. So to take that property and say you want to do something else with it, that's not going to happen there because of that reservoir. To do something with the building,
Correct.
yes, we can. I think it's a little too soon maybe to start that conversation, but, you know, I mean, yeah, you can talk about it, what it might become someday, sure.
At what point do you think that would be?
I would say let's get done with getting the transformer out, get that well abandoned that's in there. So that's not, that well is probably won't be abandoned for at least 2 years yet. Looking at our new well 8 project and the timing on that and the borrowing and getting that all done, because that's a very large project. We have to build a whole new well house and everything there. So that's a couple years out before that well would be able to be abandoned and the building repurposed for something else.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yep.
All right. Water report, June 2020.
Yeah, I'll refer to the report and highlight a couple of the last bullet points under specialty work. We just recently finished our spring hydrant flushing. We touched 789 fire hydrants, inspected them, flushed about 12 million gallons. And then our annual water quality report was delivered. We mailed out about 9,000 to customers and then hand delivered about another 1,000 to combination of community center, city hall, police, fire, both hospitals. Those. Any questions?
Thank you very much. Wastewater report, June 2020.
I just referred to the report and then also to bring attention that our WPDS permit, which is the regulations that run the wastewater treatment plant on what we can discharge, is out for public notice right now. That means that people can make comments on our permit prior to it being issued, and also the EPA has got to make comments. So we're hoping for an October 1st new permit with the adaptive management and a chloride variance included. That's it.
Comments, questions? Thank you very much. That concludes the committee report review. Any staff or committee comments? I do have a quick question. Last meeting we talked about, or maybe it was a prior meeting, that just getting out and getting a chance to take a look at facilities and get some tours, and doing individual tours for now with the way our precautions are for, did you guys get a chance to do that?
I did, I have 2
Yeah.
info.
Yeah, I've been with Joe and I'm going with Kevin either later this week or next.
Awesome. Thank you very much for making time for that. Hopefully you found what you've seen to be helpful. Thank you guys very much for making time to do that. I would like to continue to pursue sometime in August as conditions get better to do a committee group review. Sometimes conversations that can come about as a result of that are beneficial for all. With
Could sell tours of the waste treatment plant, because I shared some of the relevant facts there and had a lot of interest from my friends, so we need another income source. You could give tours there and There's interest.
Another hat, weekend tour guide?
Noted. Cool. Again, thank you all very much. And if there is nothing further, I'll look for a motion to conclude our meeting.
Second.
All in favor?